So this is a talk given by me, but it was co-authored one way or another by somebody called Jobst Landgräber, who is actually in on this call. I will introduce Jobst briefly. So first of all, he and I co-authored this paper, which you can find on archive.org. Now, Jobst is a very interesting figure. He started life reading Kant on the knee of his grandfather, Ludwig Landgräber. And then he studied mathematics and biochemistry and medicine. He was for a time a practicing physician, worked as a research bioinformatician on Alzheimer's related projects, then worked for a long time as a senior manager and entrepreneur in a large worldwide consulting company. And then he gave all that up and started a company called Cognotect, which is developing AI applications in various industries in Germany, and I think potentially also in the United States. And we've known each other for some years because we're both interested in the philosophical aspects of medical informatics. I guess that's a roughly appropriate description. But for the last couple of years, we've been working insanely often together on issues relating to the philosophical foundations of AI. And some of our examples are in medicine and biology. In fact, we use a lot of biological information in the book that we're writing, as well as mathematical information and information about physics and information about philosophy, both good and bad. And some of that will be the topic of this talk, as you will see. So the basic motto of the book is that you can only understand AI if you have a radically interdisciplinary approach, including the physics, the mathematics, the biology of intelligence, for instance, the physics of computers, the entire history of human evolution, and several other things on top of that, as well as computing and statistics and various other disciplines. All right, so these are the chapters in the book which we are currently writing. And so we start with intelligence, then we go to language, then we go to social behavior. Then we have the mathematical centerpiece of the whole book, where we talk about the mathematical limits to AI. And then we draw conclusions from that mathematical centerpiece. And today I'm going to be drawing conclusions about digital immortality and brain emulation, brain enhancement, and various other subjects. And so we have a chapter, this is the main chapter in the book, about the mathematics of complex systems and the role they play, and the reason why we have so many elaborately engineered devices, but they relate to a very restricted domain, namely the domain where we can do what we call extended Newtonian mathematics. We can think of this as just differential calculus in order to predict the behavior of those artifacts. We can only build artifacts where we can predict the behavior of the artifacts using mathematics. And so we can't build artifacts which will be complex systems, because we can't use mathematics, Newtonian mathematics, for those kinds of systems. And so these are some examples of complex systems. Every organism is a complex system. The Singapore traffic system is a complex system. Stock exchanges are complex systems. The global climate is a complex system, and the human language system is a complex system. And we give the properties of complex systems, and we give examples of simple systems in the book. All right. And now let's suppose that we are going to take the challenge, and there are hundreds of very clever people who are taking this challenge, building a machine, namely a neural network machine or an artificial intelligence machine, that can master human language. There are hundreds of very clever people doing that. And these are the ways that they want to do it. And in the book, we show that they all fail. Why they all fail, indeed. All right, so it won't happen. There will never be machine mastery of human intelligence. That's what the book says. And this is the reason. We have no mathematical models for complex systems, and human language is a complex system. So, and the various different kinds of stochastic AI, which are intending to solve this problem, don't solve the problem. I won't go into details here about that. This is the chapter about complex systems applied to language. And then these are the three final chapters, which are the only ones you're interested in. Specifically, you're interested in this one. We're still working on the title, so that isn't a very good title. It's better than what we had before. All right, so this is America's highest paid female CEO, Martine Rothblatt, or I don't know how she pronounces her word in Californian, her name. And she talks about transgenderism. Transgenderism, she says, is being trapped in the wrong body. And what she wants is freedom of gender, so that we're not limited by our sexual anatomy and so forth. But she goes further than that. So instead of just advocating transgenderism, she also advocates transhumanism. And transhumanism would be being trapped in a body at all. So she is trapped in the wrong body because she's trapped in a body, and all bodies are the wrong body. That's the idea. Now, in order to understand what's going on here, we need to think about what it is, the identity which survives when you are no longer trapped in the wrong body. And this turns out to be a very, very difficult topic, but in order to bring some control over the topic, we're going to consider the following thought experiment. You have just been involved in a terrible traffic accident. Many of your limbs are no longer serviceable, and the surgeon bends over you and says, "Do you want me to save your life?" And the question is, under certain circumstances, you might very well say no. So if he tells you that it will only give you 5 minutes more life, you'll probably say no. If he tells you that you will be in a wheelchair and can never speak or see or communicate or hear, you'd probably say no. So the question is, what would it be required for you to have to count as surviving so that you would say yes? And this may be not just surviving in the sense that the surgeon will repair your own body. It may be surviving in the sense that your brain is transplanted to another body, or indeed, and that's what we're going to be talking about very soon, it may be that you're surviving in the sense that your brain contents are transplanted into somebody else's body or into no body at all. What would make the transplant worthwhile? What would have to survive? Well, your identity. What is your identity? Well, I'm going to suggest that it's this. It's a complex pattern of dispositions, like your dispositions to speak English, the capabilities. They are dispositions in which you have an interest in their realization. These result from your genes, but also from environmental influences. So your neurophysiology gives you all kinds of dispositions. And you want to keep the important dispositions. So the ephemeral ones, you don't mind if you lose those because you can bring them back. But the lasting ones, the fact that you can speak English or some other language, that you can remember faces, that you can tell jokes and so on, you want to keep those. Above all, you want to keep your capability to have conscious experiences. And that is non-trivial. So it could be that you could still tell jokes. Zombies could tell jokes for all I know. But you, if you want to survive, are going to want to keep the capability to have conscious experiences. All right. So I'm repeating myself now. The only thing new here is, how could you ever know that it will do so? So in other words, if I tell you I'm going to transplant your brain into this thing here, and you'll still be conscious and you'll still have all your memories, how will you ever know that you will still be conscious? How you can never know. Anyway, so John's identity, or Martina's identity, is a complex of dispositions, and the material basis of that complex of dispositions is the what we will call the neural substrate. It's John's brain, perhaps including also other neurologically relevant parts of John's body. And whether we want to keep John's mental disorders, so John may be very hyper or something, that's a question that we can consider. That would certainly be a long-standing genetically based disposition of John. But that's not relevant here. All right, so this is the ontological picture. We have John's neural substrate, which is the material basis of John's identity, which is realized. John's identity is a set of capabilities, including linguistic capabilities, which are realized when John speaks to Mary. And we don't really need to talk about all the other things because they are already dealt with one way or another. The only thing we need to say is that there is an inheres in relation. So the dispositions that we have inhere in some brain or some bodily structure, the bearer of our dispositions. All right, now this is what it happens at time t. John is speaking to Mary at time t1, and at that time, John's identity has as its material substrate John's brain, John's body, something that we can see and feel and give food to. But then at time t2, John is speaking to Mary again. We won't think too carefully about Mary for the moment. And now John has as the substrate of his identity something digital, some locations on a hard drive in the cloud somewhere. So that's the scenario. So John's identity first has a material basis, which is his neural substrate, and then a digital substrate. So there are two kinds of material basis. This is all very familiar. I just have some colored pictures. Question is, how do we get from one to the other? Well, we put John to sleep and extract the contents of his brain and put the contents into the cloud. So Martina tells us how this will happen. So the idea is something like this. John's identity inheres in John's digital substrate, she says, in just the same way that it adheres in his neural substrate, because the same pattern is going to exist in here and in here, a quality pattern. We'll see how this works in a minute. So, transgenderism and transhumanism both start with the idea that there is some identity, and we're still going to argue that's a complex of dispositions. It changes over time. You become more mature, and you want to preserve your identity, but in another body. Now, how does this work for transgenderism? Well, actually, it doesn't work, because Martina still has the same body. She still has the same identity. So transgenderism is not ontologically a difficult problem. It's just a surgically difficult problem. But that problem has been solved. There is no ontological problem to solve. What about the transhumanist case? Well, that's much more difficult. So what is this thing that has the identity? Well, this is Martina's account. In 2006, there are things called beams, which are a generalization or a new version of the Dawkins idea of a meme. She calls them beams. And I don't really want to read this out, but basically they're patterns. Each beam is comprised of a large number of beamiotides, much like gene-based pairs. So if you have a language of patterns relating to mannerisms, personality, feelings, all the bits which make up these things, then you can, these would be beamiotides, and you have a beam which is the pattern of all your beamiotides. And now, because it's a pattern, it can be a pattern in neural stuff, in bodily, organic, biological stuff, or it can be a pattern in digital stuff. Cryonics is based, she says, on beam revival. And having common beams, that's going to be, she thinks, a new basis for species definition. So in future, there will be two types of beams, human beams, which she calls hubems, I think, and digital beams. I don't know what she calls that. In fact, I don't think she uses this terminology anymore. It's just so beautiful. There'll be human beams and digital beams, and they can have babies. Anyway, so this is how it works. Beams would be captured through your life. So you would have a bouquet of nanowires threaded through your brain, which will monitor all the activities of all your brain cells. And then the output of these brain cells can be retrieved later and uploaded as beams. And then to make those beams conscious, you would need what she calls mindware, which is a very, very powerful kind of software, which turns beams into consciousness. And so when we have beams, when we have machines with this human level of intelligence, we will be able to beam ourselves into cyberspace. I think that's why she chose the word beam, just for that pun. And then, of course, the problem is, how will we know that the beamans are conscious? Well, her answer is, consciousness is like pornography. We'll know it when we see it. That's her answer. Now, the first answer I have is that the idea of this bouquet of nanowires is nonsense. And Jobs can explain in great detail why it's nonsense. And then the other answer I have is, you go first. So I'll wait and see how it works out for you before I start recording all the activities of all the cells in my brain. All right, so go back to transhumanism now. The idea is that your pattern, exactly similar pattern of dispositions, will remain, and it believes it's you, and it will be conscious, but that's the part which is hard to prove. Something else that will need to make survival worthwhile is that thing which survives will need to be able to converse in the machine and probably with other machines. In principle, machine humans can converse also with flesh humans, but we certainly want to be able to converse with something. And we know that the Turing test has not yet been passed by any machine, and Jobs and I believe that we have a very powerful argument why it will never be passed by a machine, so that human conversation between or involving machines is in fact impossible. But surely this is something that we would want. All right, so that's the Turing test. The Turing test measures the ability to conduct credible dialogues with human beings and with other beamans. All right, now Faraday's maxim is, so this might all be possible because of Faraday's maxim. Nothing is too wonderful to be true if it's be consistent with the laws of nature. And we'll say the laws of physics, just to be clear about what we're doing here. So it could be that the planet Earth will be swallowed by a black hole tomorrow. That the planet Earth being swallowed by a black hole tomorrow is consistent with the laws of physics. Things are being swallowed by black holes all the time. The problem is getting there. How do we get to that happening tomorrow? That's impossible, because it's going to take at least a very long time before the planet Earth gets near a black hole. And to be swallowed by a black hole, you have to be near it. So it's not just the laws of physics governing the state of affairs that you're interested in, which you need to consider. It's the process of getting there. And so even if Martina's ideas about beam patterns being uploadable from brains so that the pattern of your brain and so on, even if that's consistent with the laws of physics, the big problem is, can it be brought about in a process which is consistent with the laws of physics? So if putting all of these tubes in your brain so that every single cell of your brain is such that every single event in that cell is being recorded in real time, if that's physically impossible, which it is, and if that's the only way in which you can get the beam thing to work, then Faraday's maxim will tell, the extended Faraday maxim will tell us that it's impossible. Even if it's wonderful, it's still impossible. All right, so it's impossible because we can't get there, independently of whether there's something there to be got. We've seen all of this. Now we see the recipe in, so Martina, to be honest, is a great mind and a great entrepreneur, but much of what she writes is not yet science. Now, Nick Bostrom is a great author, and much of what he writes looks much more like science than what Martina writes. And I recommend this book to anybody who is interested in this sort of thing. So we're just going to go through, I don't have much time left. We're just going to go through a couple of things which Nick, I just call him Bostrom, that's why I'd forgotten his name, which Nick describes achieving. And so whole brain emulation. So one of the ways in which we will achieve digital immortality is by creating superintelligence so that we can then use the bemiotides in order to reconstitute an identity in the cloud. So how do we get superintelligence? Well, one way is to create whole brain emulation. In other words, we take a particularly intelligent brain, like Nick's brain, and we emulate it digitally. And there are 3 steps. We scan it, we translate the scans into a scan interpretation, which will be a software model of Nick's brain, and then we create a simulation in a computer so that now that we can run the simulation, and that will be Nick's brain counterpart alive, or anyway, continuing on. So step 1 is scanning. Now, you can't do that for various reasons. First of all, in order to scan a brain, you need to fixate the brain material so that you can apply microscopic imaging, but that kills the cells. And in order to get to the second and third steps, we need to understand how the cells in the brain are functioning. And if we kill them, we lose all the information that we need in order to capture the dynamics of molecular interaction. So we can't even kill the person in order to get the data, because that would kill the cells. And I just said that. So maybe we can have some kind of magical MRI machine which could track the activities of Nick's brain in real time, and we can't. And that's because of resolution problems. So MRI techniques go down to about 20 microns and 50 pictures, 50 images per second. But the brain mechanisms that we need to study involve events down to the level of a few atoms. We can understand the biology of those events, as it were, but because they're down to the level of a few atoms, we need much more high resolution MRI, and that would mean resolution at 3 orders of magnitude smaller and at 3 orders of magnitude faster, and we just can't get that technically. So we can't get the data, but let's suppose we get the data from step 1, and now we have to translate it into computer code. So that means build a model which would capture all the data that we acquired in step 1. All the information about all the neurotransmitters in all the synaptic clefts, and measures of all the ion fluxes and all the chemical and all the other signaling events going on inside Nick's brain. Now, we still, even if we had data about all of those things, I think 10 to the 40th data points we're talking about now, we still couldn't model Nick's mental experiences. And the reason is that they don't just depend upon what's going on in the cells, they also depend upon the molecular configuration of those cells. And this molecular configuration depends on the entire genome that the cell carries in its nucleus, which is already quite a big object. The epigenetic chemical modifications of this genome, which are different from one person to the next. And then the molecular configuration of the non-nuclear parts of the cell, which is hundreds of thousands of molecules, which are again shaped by the experiences of the organism since conception. So that it's very important to get those molecular configurations right. And we can't have any access to that information via imaging anyway. There's just no way in which we can have sufficient resolution to get into the interior structure of the cell in that way. And that interior of the structure of the cell is changing all the time. And so we need to capture the changes, not just the snapshot at a time, in order to work out, get a model of how the cell is working, because you need that in order to reanimate the cell in the cloud, and we can't do that. All right, so step 2 also fails. Even if we could get 10 to the 15th molecules at a resolution of 10 to the 21 data points per second, we still couldn't emulate the behavior of the relevant collection of cells, because we would have no mathematical model, because it's a complex system. All right, step 3, simulation. So we actually, in the book, we don't discuss step 3 because it depends on successfully realizing steps 1 and 2. Step 1 is impossible, and step 2 is exactly 24.3 orders of magnitude more impossible, and I'll explain where that number comes from in a minute. All right, so quantum computers, some people think, will solve all our problems, but no, they're just way faster than classical computers. They're still Turing machines, so they still place this great limit on mathematical models. So what about biological enhancements of a brain? So Nick thinks that if we could carry out embryo selection very, very radically, we could rapidly increase the IQ of the babies. And and he says, we can select more intelligent individuals through embryo selection, which can yield an increase, and this is where the 24.3 comes from, to 24.3 IQ points. And to get that increase, we would need to select 999 out of every 1,000, we would need to discard 999 out of every 1,000 embryos in one generation. And if we keep doing that over several generations, we could reach quite large numbers of IQ improvement. And we don't need to have 1,000 couples allowing just one of them to select their embryo. We can have just one couple, and we do anyway. Well, I won't go into that. All right. The problem is that intelligence is a complex trait, which means that we don't know which gene loci bring it about, and we have to identify those gene loci in order to make the changes which will lead to the corresponding biological enhancements. And the complex traits then arise from interactions between these gene loci and between those other factors I mentioned earlier, which involve trillions of molecules at both cellular and molecular and intercellular levels. And there are some of these interactions, even if we had the data, are just not computable. Therefore, I guess the therefore is pretty clear. We have no mechanism for measuring the differences and no idea about how we might integrate them in order to decide which parts of the set of gene loci we should modify and how. And we would, if we tried to do it, we'd probably end up doing damage. I won't talk about that. So this is a final problem, which says that, well, no, I won't talk about that. I'll just stop.